Imagine waking up tomorrow and just completely out of nowhere, everything you know about your place in society is just, it's shattered.
Right. Just totally gone.
Yeah. Like you check your bank account.
Yeah.
And your salary just hasn't been deposited. So you try to log into your work email to see what's going on, and your access is revoked.
Which is terrifying.
Exactly. So naturally, you start applying for new jobs in your field jobs that you are, highly qualified for. But your applications just disappear into this black hole.
They don't even get a rejection letter.
Right. And within, like, a matter of months, you realize you've been permanently locked out of your career, your income is destroyed, and you're effectively a ghost in your own country's economy. But here is the absolute craziest part of this scenario.
Yeah, the hook here is wild.
It didn't happen because of some massive, unavoidable economic crash. It didn't happen because your industry died. It happened because of a quiet, invisible data fingerprint. You'd literally just exercised a legal democratic right, and an algorithm flagged you for economic exile.
And, I mean, the sheer speed of that transition is what makes it so chilling. One day, you're this functioning, contributing member of the middle class, paying taxes, using your specialized education, and the next day, you are algorithmically erased from the formal economy.
It's anti-common sense, like a total slap in the face.
It really is. And the mechanics of this erasure, they completely bypass how we usually think about authoritarianism.
Right, like secret police or whatever.
Exactly. It's not executed by police kicking down your door in the middle of the night. It isn't done with, like, physical violence or these big show trials. It is executed with a few keystrokes, just running a simple database query on a perfectly mundane piece of office software.
I mean, that fundamentally rewrites the social contract. Like, we tend to view our digital footprints as, I don't know, privacy nuisance, right? We worry about targeted ads or a tech company selling our browsing habits.
Yeah, getting spammed with emails.
Right. But our deep dive today explores what happens when that exact same data infrastructure is weaponized by a state, and weaponized with this surgical mathematical precision.
It's a fascinating and, frankly, terrifying case study.
It really is. So we're looking at this groundbreaking 2009 paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research. It's by 4 world-class scholars, Chong, Edward Miguel, Daniel Ortega, and Francisco Rodriguez. And they managed to breach this enormous information blockade to uncover this.
Using cold, hard data.
Exactly. They proved a government was using software and cross-reference databases to execute a massive, precise economic purge of its own citizens.
And the location for this unprecedented event was Venezuela. This primarily unfolded during the early 2000s. And the findings in this paper are just incredibly important because they document the exact moment in history when political oppression evolved from, like, analog to digital.
Right.
It's literally the prototype for modern algorithmic control.
Okay, before we get into the crazy methodology of how these economists actually proved this, because that part is mind-blowing, I need to make a very, very clear note to everyone listening.
Yes. Very important context here.
Right. So the events we're discussing involve highly charged, volatile political conflict in Venezuela, right? Between left-wing and right-wing factions. We are not here to take any political sides at all.
Right. No endorsements of any political viewpoints from either end.
Exactly. Our mission today is simply to impartially report on the economic data, the statistical methodology, and the historical events exactly as they are documented in this NBER source material. We're just looking at the math and the outcomes of a specific technological tool.
And examining that math, it really strips away almost every preconceived notion we have about how a nation's economy degrades.
How so?
Well, we usually assume that an economic downfall hits a society like a hurricane, right? Like, it's indiscriminate, it's chaotic, it causes widespread damage that affects everyone relatively similarly.
Yeah, a rising tide sinks all boats, or however you'd say the opposite of that phrase.
Right, exactly. But the data reveals something entirely different here. It wasn't a hurricane, it was like a targeted digital sniper rifle. It was picking off specific individuals based on a primary key in a database.
God, that's such a visceral image. So to understand how someone even ends up in the crosshairs of that database, we have to look at the macroeconomic baseline of Venezuela leading up to this, right?
Yeah.
Like, why were people restless enough to take the action that ultimately doomed them?
Right. And that desperation was born out of a prolonged, just agonizing economic contraction. The paper points out the staggering statistic. Between 1978 and 1998, Venezuela's GDP per worker had fallen by 32%.
Wow. Wait, 32% over 2 decades?
Yes. Think about what that actually means on the ground for real families. A third of the country's wealth and purchasing power essentially evaporated.
Just vanished.
Vanished. So you have an entire generation entering the workforce poorer than their parents, which is wild considering the country is sitting on massive oil reserves.
Right, they're an oil powerhouse.
Exactly. So this systemic decline bred deep, deep resentment toward the traditional political establishment, which everyone basically viewed as corrupt and inefficient.
And so that kind of massive economic frustration creates a power vacuum, right?
Yeah.
Which leads to the election of Hugo Chávez in 1998. He capitalizes on that anger, wins with like 56% of the vote, and immediately starts overhauling the state machinery.
Yeah, he completely rewrote the roles.
Including passing a completely new constitution in 1999.
And that 1999 constitution is the catalyst for everything that follows. So after securing his position under the new rules in 2000, Chávez begins pushing through these highly controversial laws.
What kind of laws?
We're talking sweeping land reform, aggressive tax increases on the state-owned oil company, PDVSA, and this creates an immediate, highly polarized backlash.
Okay, so people are pushing back.
Big time. Business organizations, labor unions, the middle-class professional sector, they all mobilize against the government. The tension escalates to nationwide strikes. And even a brief, really chaotic military coup in 2002, where Chávez is actually ousted for 2 days.
Oh, wow. 2 days.
Yeah, before loyal military factions reinstated him. So the country is essentially split right down the middle, and the atmosphere is just intensely volatile.
And that volatility is what makes the opposition's next move so fascinating to me. Because instead of continuing down this path of like extra-legal action or military coups, they decide to use a tool that was written directly into Chávez's own 1999 constitution.
Yeah, a purely democratic administrative mechanism.
Right, so what was this mechanism?
So the new constitution contained this very novel feature, the recall referendum. Article 72 explicitly stated that if citizens could gather the signatures of 20% of registered voters, they could legally force a binding election to remove any elected official from office.
Including the president.
Including the president. So for the opposition, this looked like their democratic salvation. You know, it was a legally enshrined, peaceful pathway out of this boiling national crisis. They just needed to organize and collect the signatures.
But the physical act of collecting those signatures. I mean, the paper details this. It turns into this grueling multi-month logistical nightmare. It wasn't just setting up some clipboards at a grocery store on a Saturday.
Oh, not at all. The resistance from the state bureaucracy was immense. The opposition actually had to go through 3 distinct, brutal petition drives over the course of 18 months.
3? Why did it take 3 tries?
Well, the first attempt happened in November 2002. They mobilized this massive volunteer effort, gather about 1.6 million signatures for what was essentially a non-binding referendum.
Okay.
But the Supreme Court, which heavily favored the administration, just threw the entire effort out on a technicality. They ruled that the National Electoral Council, the body overseeing the process, wasn't legally constituted at the time. So the court intervened and appointed a new pro-government electoral council.
Wow. Okay, so that's a massive blow to morale. You collect over 1 million signatures and the court just weighs it away.
Exactly. But the opposition immediately regroups. They launch a second drive just a few months later in February 2003. This one was known as the Firmazo.
And how did that one go?
The mobilization was even larger. In a single day, they collected 2.8 million signatures. And this time, they were explicitly calling for a binding recall.
Okay, so surely that passes the threshold.
You'd think. But the newly appointed Electoral Council rejected it again. Their reasoning this time relied on a super strict interpretation of the Constitution, which stated a recall could only occur after the midpoint of a president's term.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yep. The opposition argued they submitted the signatures exactly at the midpoint, but the council ruled the collection process itself happened too early, making all 2.8 million signatures completely invalid.
That is just that the bureaucratic walls are actively closing in on them. At this point, the opposition realizes they are fighting a war of administrative attrition. But the economy is still tanking, so they launch a third and final attempt.
Right, the third attempt. Launched in December 2003, it's called the Reaffirmazo. And by this point, the Electoral Council has implemented these incredibly strict logistical barriers.
Like what?
You couldn't just sign a piece of paper on the street anymore. The council set up 2,700 official signing stations across the country. Citizens had to physically travel to these specific locations over a designated 4-day period and sign their names under direct official supervision.
So it required immense personal effort and public visibility. You couldn't be anonymous about it.
Exactly. Yet, despite those hurdles, nearly 3.5 million voters physically show up to these stations. The sheer scale of that civic participation is just staggering.
That really is staggering. So they get the 3.5 million. Are they finally clear?
Not yet. The administrative hurdles didn't stop there. Upon receiving those 3.5 million signatures, the Electoral Council outright discarded almost 400,000 of them based on, various alleged irregularities.
Seriously. Just toss them out.
Just toss them. And, more severely, they flagged over 1 million signatures as questionable and demanded that those specific individuals return to a government station a few months later in May 2004 to verify their identity and signature in person.
That is insane. It's like a massive test of stamina and courage.
It was, yet astonishingly, over 50% of those challenged voters actually showed up to re-verify.
Unbelievable. So after 18 months of technicalities, rejected lists, physical verifications, they finally crossed the 20% threshold. And the recall election is officially scheduled for August 2004.
They finally did it.
And the source material notes that across all three of these massive petition drives, an incredible 4.7 million Venezuelans signed their names to paper. That is nearly 1/3 of the entire registered voting population. It's just massive.
The numbers represent this enormous cross-section of the population actively engaging in a constitutional process.
Right. And this is where the narrative takes that dark, anti-common sense turn we talked about.
Yeah.
Because these 4.7 million people, they believed they were performing their highest civic duty.
Absolutely.
They were participating in a transparent, democratic mechanism specifically designed to resolve national conflicts peacefully. But in reality, by engaging with that system, they were unwittingly constructing the exact database that would be used to destroy their livelihoods.
It's a tragic irony.
It's like clicking a link on an official government portal to opt out of a program, only to discover that the opt-out button actually authorized a piece of malware to empty your bank account. You think you're using a tool for freedom, but you're actually providing the primary key for your own surveillance.
The malware analogy is entirely appropriate here, especially regarding how the data was harvested. But what sets this historical event apart from, traditional forms of oppression is that the government didn't even keep their intentions a secret. They didn't covertly build this database in the shadows. They advertised it. They ran a massive psychological operation to let the public know exactly what signing that petition meant.
Okay, let's talk about those warnings, because the level of blatant intimidation is hard to even wrap your head around. In October 2003, right as the opposition is gearing up for that crucial third petition drive, President Chávez goes on national television. And he doesn't just give a normal political speech about defeating his opponents. He literally outlines a data collection strategy on live TV.
He did. During this live broadcast, he issued a direct, chilling warning to the populace. He stated that whoever signs the petition against him will have their name registered for history.
Registered for history. Wow.
And he specifically detailed the data points that would be captured. First name, last name, identity card number, signature, and fingerprint. He was publicly declaring that engaging in this process meant surrendering your identifying biometric and bureaucratic data to the state permanently.
I mean, that phrase, registered for history, it's doing so much heavy lifting. It transforms a simple political disagreement into an eternal, unerasable record of disloyalty.
Exactly. And the state amplified that message through an aggressive media campaign. They ran these full-page advertisements in national newspapers with the headline, "Retira tu firma, withdraw your signature."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. These ads claimed that the opposition's signature lists were fraudulent, filled with dead people and forged names. But the subtext was this clear threat. If you were tricked into signing, or if you had second thoughts, you needed to go to the Electoral Council's website immediately to formally remove your name before it was too late.
The source material highlights one specific visual from this campaign that I just find completely haunting. In the middle of Caracas, the capital city, the government erected a massive street billboard.
Yeah, the billboard.
It didn't have a picture of a candidate. It didn't have a normal political slogan. It just had these massive red letters that read, "Your vote is secret. Your signature is not."
Imagine the psychological friction that creates for a citizen. You live in a highly polarized society where the state controls a vast portion of the economy, especially the oil sector. When the government erects a monument essentially promising that your political dissent will not remain anonymous, it forces a terrifying calculus.
It's a bold declaration.
Yeah. It's the state telling you, we will know exactly who you are. The veil of the secret ballot does not apply here.
And despite all of that intimidation, millions still signed. The threshold was met, and the recall election happened in August 2004.
Right.
But Chávez won. He secured 59% of the vote and survived the recall. So the opposition was defeated at the ballot box.
And the moment that election concluded, the immediate political threat to the administration vanished. But the data collected during that 18-month struggle, that did not vanish.
Right.
Leading up to the recall, pro-government legislators had actually published the raw lists of petition signers on the internet. But after the election, those raw lists were taken down.
But they weren't deleted.
No, they were being integrated.
They were being fed into Maisanta.
Maisanta. That is the technological hinge upon which this entire tragedy turns. Sometime in the spring of 2004, and accelerating heavily after the August recall, this specific piece of software began circulating throughout Venezuela.
And it wasn't some highly classified thing, right?
Not at all. It wasn't a classified tool restricted to top-level intelligence officers. It was a sleek, user-friendly desktop application.
When I try to visualize political persecution, my mind automatically goes to the analog era. I picture like dusty manila folders in a windowless basement filled with grainy photographs and typed surveillance reports.
Sure, but the manila folder is slow, it's inefficient, and it's super expensive to maintain. Maisanta was the digital leap forward. The software contained a mirrored copy of the entire National Registry of Voters as of March 2004.
Wow.
We're talking about a database of over 12.39 million individuals.
So it's essentially a searchable directory of the entire adult population of the country. How did the interface actually work? Like, what would a user see when they open it up on their computer?
The user interface was brilliantly simple, which is exactly what made it so dangerous. A user, say, an HR manager at a state-owned enterprise, would open the program and see a search bar. They'd type in a citizen's national identity card number. And instantly, the screen would populate with that individual's core demographic data. First name, last name, date of birth, and registered address.
Okay, so basically a completely standard bureaucratic tool up to that point.
Right. But the defining feature of Maisanta was a brightly colored visual indicator next to the individual's ID number. If that specific person had signed the crucial third recall petition, a blue tag would instantly appear on their profile.
The blue tag, yeah.
That little blue tag effectively coded them, in the eyes of the state, as a verified political opponent.
A single line of code determining your loyalty. It's just wild. But the software went even further than just cross-referencing voter rolls, didn't it?
It did. The developers of Maisanta accomplished something far more sophisticated than just a simple list match. At the bottom of the user's profile, the software displayed whether that individual was currently participating in or benefiting from various government social programs.
The Misiones, right.
Exactly, the Misiones. This included data on subsidized food distribution, state-sponsored housing programs, and educational welfare.
Wait, let me make sure I understand the technical architecture here. They didn't just take the Electoral Council's petition list. They took the electoral data and structurally merged it with the internal administrative databases of the national welfare system.
Yes.
So they used the citizen's national ID number as a primary key to link a person's political activity directly to their reliance on state resources.
You've hit on the exact mechanism of control. By crossing the streams of electoral data and social safety net data, they created this comprehensive dashboard of a citizen's vulnerability. And they didn't hide the software, they distributed it widely.
Who got copies of it?
Copies of Maisanta were given to government ministries, public sector agencies, the military, state-owned enterprises. Human resources departments literally installed it on their local machines. Managers used it to screen applicants and review current employees.
Oh my God.
It was the democratization of surveillance. The state empowered every mid-level bureaucrat to act as an agent of political filtration.
It is the ultimate anti-common sense revelation about technology, because we are conditioned to believe that technological efficiency in government is inherently a good thing.
Right, we want things to be easier.
Exactly. We want databases to talk to each other so that we don't have to fill out the exact same form at the DMV and then again at the tax office.
Okay.
But here, the efficiency of a relational database was the exact tool used to scale political oppression completely frictionlessly.
The friction is the key word there. In an analog system, checking the political loyalty of 12 million people requires an army of informants and clerks. With Maisanta, the marginal cost of checking a citizen's loyalty dropped to absolute zero. It took 2 seconds.
But, okay, if a government is utilizing software to purge its workforce, They aren't going to hold a press conference and admit it, right? They're going to claim that people are losing their jobs because of budget cuts or poor performance or just general economic malaise.
Of course.
Which brings us to the central challenge of this NBER paper. How do you mathematically prove that a database is causing unemployment rather than just normal economic churn? Because anecdotes aren't enough.
No, they're not. I mean, the anecdotal evidence was certainly there. Journalists compiled countless stories of individuals who were fired immediately after their bosses checked the Maisanta software. But from a rigorous econometric standpoint, anecdotes cannot prove systemic causality.
Right. The government's defense is perfectly plausible on the surface. The country had just gone through a massive strike. The economy was turbulent, so of course people were losing jobs.
Exactly. So to prove that Maisanta was the actual weapon, these 4 researchers had to execute an absolute masterclass in data science. They had to cross a massive information blockade.
So explain the mechanics of this blockade. What data did they actually need to prove the purge was real?
They needed to link the digital hit list, the Maisanta database, to the actual verifiable economic outcomes of individual humans over time.
Okay.
They needed to see what happened to a person's wages and employment status before and after the software was released. So to do this, first, they acquired the complete Maisanta database. That gave them the political status of about 10 million registered voters. That's part 1.
And part 2.
Part 2 was securing the microdata from Venezuela's National Household Survey.
The household survey, how does that work? Is it like a national census?
It's more granular than a census, and it's conducted regularly. It's managed by the National Institute of Statistics, and it tracks a representative sample of real families across the country.
Okay, what kind of data does it track?
The survey asks highly detailed questions about employment status, monthly earnings, education level, age, gender, and geographic location, and the researchers gained access to survey waves covering a 10-year period from 1997 all the way to 2006. This survey captured the economic lives of nearly 145,000 individuals.
Okay, hold on. I see a massive structural problem here.
What's that?
The Maisanta database is explicitly designed to identify people, right?
Yeah.
It has their names and ID numbers. But a national household survey, by law and by design, is entirely anonymous. It's just statistical data.
Right.
There are no names and no ID numbers attached to the survey responses.
So how on earth do you match an anonymous economic survey to a political hit list? Isn't there like a 0% overlap in identifying keys?
That is the exact hurdle that would have stopped a less creative research team. You are completely correct. There were no ID numbers or names in the household survey. However, the researchers realized that while the survey was legally anonymous, it was not mathematically untraceable.
Okay, color me intrigued. They utilized a concept in data science related to k-anonymity. See, the household survey contained a person's exact date of birth, year, and month. It contained their gender. And crucially, it contained the specific paroquia or local parish where the person resided.
So they have age, gender, and a highly localized geographic marker.
Yes. Now look at the Maisanta database. Maisanta has the exact same 3 variables: date of birth, gender, and the voting center, which corresponds directly to the paroquia of residence. The researchers essentially created a synthetic primary key out of those 3 variables.
I'm still a little skeptical, honestly. If you just match birth month, gender, and parish, isn't there a massive margin of error? What if 2 men born in October 1965 happen to live in the exact same small neighborhood?
Yeah. It's a fair question, and the researchers rigorously calculated the probability of those collisions. Paroquias in Venezuela are relatively small geographic units. When you combine a specific small geographic area with a specific gender and a specific birth year and month, the statistical probability of 2 identical individuals existing in both the Maisanta database and the sample of the household survey is incredibly low.
Wow.
Yeah. So by running an algorithm that matched these 3 specific variables, they were able to uniquely de-anonymize and precisely link nearly 146,000 individual records.
That is just staggering. They essentially reverse-engineered the anonymity of a government economic survey by cross-referencing it against the government's own surveillance database. They literally forced the state's numbers to testify against the state's actions.
Precisely. They built this massive merged data set. For 146,000 people, they could now see a 10-year trajectory of their salary and employment, and they knew exactly whether that person had a blue tag next to their name in the Maisanta software.
They had the economic outcomes and they had the algorithmic trigger.
Yeah.
All in one place. Okay, but even with that merged database, the statistical challenge isn't over. Because the government could still argue that the people who signed the petition were simply concentrated in failing industries, right?
Hmm.
Or perhaps they were older workers who are naturally aging out of the workforce. How did the economists isolate the effect of the signature from all the other noise in the economy?
This brings us to the core of their econometric modeling. Because to prove causality, you can't just compare the average signer to the average non-signer. As you pointed out, they might be fundamentally different types of people.
Right.
The researchers first had to establish a baseline. Who were the people signing this petition? They looked at the data from 1997 to 2002, before any political crisis even emerged.
Okay, so what did the demographic profile of the opposition look like during those peaceful years?
The data clearly shows that the signers were, on average, the middle class and the professional elite. Compared to non-signers, the people who eventually signed the petition had higher incomes, roughly 9.5% higher.
Makes sense.
They were more educated, possessing about 0.8 more years of formal schooling, and they were significantly more likely to be employed in the formal sector, holding stable professional jobs.
Which totally tracks. A professional middle class is usually the demographic most heavily invested in protecting property rights and stable economic governance.
Yeah.
But if they already had higher incomes, how do you mathematically prove that their subsequent downfall was unnatural?
The researchers utilized a statistical technique called propensity score matching, alongside rigorous regression analysis. Essentially, they controlled for all of those observable variables. They mathematically adjusted the data to account for differences in age, education, gender, and geographic location.
So they leveled the playing field.
Exactly. They created synthetic twins, comparing a signer to a non-signer who had the exact same education, age, and professional background.
So they isolate the signature as the single differing variable.
Exactly. And when you apply those controls, the economic trajectory of the signers and the non-signers prior to 2004 is absolutely identical.
Really? Identical.
The lines on their economic graphs are practically stacked on top of each other. If the economy dipped in 1999, both groups saw their wages dip by the exact same percentage. If it recovered in 2001, both groups recovered equally. There is zero difference in their economic momentum.
The math just strips away the failing industry excuse entirely. It's like watching two identical cars driving side by side on the highway for 7 years. They are matching speed perfectly, accelerating and braking in total unison. Then, right at the 2004 mile marker, an invisible hand suddenly smashes one car violently into the ditch while the other car just keeps cruising along unimpeded.
The 2004 mile marker is exactly where the data becomes terrifying. Once Maisanta is widely distributed in late 2004 and throughout 2005, the graph just fractures.
What does the drop look like?
The data shows two distinct cliff-diving lines for the people who signed the petition. In 2005, the employment rate for signers suddenly drops by 1.5 percentage points compared to their non-signing twins, and their overall earnings suffer a sudden, unexplainable 5% drop.
I want to pause on that 1.5% employment drop because to a casual listener, 1.5% might sound like a pretty minor fluctuation, but we have to scale that up.
The scale is what makes it a purge. You have to apply that 1.5 percentage point drop to the entire population of the 4.7 million people who signed. We are talking about tens of thousands of individuals suddenly simultaneously losing their livelihoods.
Wow.
And a 5% aggregate drop in wages across millions of middle-class professionals, that represents a catastrophic destruction of personal wealth and purchasing power.
And the researchers, I'm assuming, ran these numbers through every possible statistical robustness check.
Oh, they absolutely tortured the data to see if the outcome would break. They checked for state-level economic shocks. They checked to see if the demand for specific specialized skills had suddenly dropped. They controlled for the fact that the informal sector was growing generally. None of it changed the outcome. If you hypothesize that educated people as a whole were just losing money in 2005, the data says no highly educated people who didn't sign the petition did perfectly fine. The only variable that consistently mathematically explains the economic crash of these specific individuals is the presence of their ID number on that software list.
But I want to play devil's advocate here for a second because human nature is messy.
Sure, go ahead.
What if the explanation isn't the software? What if, after the intensely bitter recall election of 2004, the country was just so polarized that a general society-wide prejudice took hold? Like maybe people just started firing their neighbors because they knew they hated the president and it had nothing to do with Maisanta. How do we know it was the algorithmic query doing the punishing rather than just organic political tribalism?
This is where the researchers uncovered the most chilling finding in the entire paper. It is the absolute, irrefutable smoking gun that proves the software was the weapon.
Okay, lay it on me.
To understand this, we have to go back to the mechanics of the 3 petition drives. Do you remember the timeline?
Yes. The first drive was November 2002. The second was February 2003. And the third, the one that finally succeeded, was December 2003.
Keep those 3 distinct lists in mind. Now, earlier we mentioned a pro-government legislator named Luis Tascon. He actually acquired the names of the people who signed the first 2 petitions, the ones that were rejected by the Electoral Council.
Right, the early ones.
He published those lists online. So the political identities of the people who signed in late 2002 and early 2003 were entirely public knowledge. The government knew exactly who they were. Their neighbors knew who they were.
Okay, so their political opposition was documented and out there.
But, and this is the crucial distinction, the Maisanta software, the sleek application sitting on the desk of every public sector HR manager, was built almost exclusively using the data from the 3rd petition drive, the final list.
Oh my God, I see where this regression analysis is going.
The researchers split their matched data set. They isolated a very specific group of people, individuals who signed the first or second petition, but for whatever reason, fatigue, fear, or just changing their mind, did not sign the 3rd petition.
Okay.
And then they compared them to the people who did sign the 3rd petition. Both groups are documented political opponents of the regime. Both groups took public action. What do you think the economic data showed for 2005?
The people who signed the first 2, but skipped the 3rd, they escaped.
They experienced 0 wage loss. Statistically, the people who only signed the first 2 petitions saw absolutely no drop in employment and no drop in wages in 2005 compared to baseline non-signers.
No way. Not at all.
They were completely unharmed. But the people who signed the 3rd petition, the ones whose ID numbers were hard-coded into the Maisanta software, their wages plummeted by a staggering 9.3%.
That completely eliminates the theory of organic society-wide prejudice. I mean, if I was a vocal opponent of the president and I signed the first 2 petitions and my boss knew I was in the opposition because my name was on the internet in 2002, I get my job.
Yep.
But only as long as my ID number didn't light up with a blue tag when HR ran the Maisanta query in 2005.
The precision is terrifying. You didn't get punished for hating the president. You didn't get punished for your personal political beliefs. You got punished solely because a specific database query returned a positive Boolean value. It proves, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that this was algorithmic punishment. It was a digital system executing a purge with blind, mechanical adherence to a single line of code.
It is algorithmic precision applied to human ruin. So we talked about the macro statistics, but I want to understand what this actually looks like on the ground. Where is this purge executing? What sectors of the economy are collapsing these people's lives?
The purge was overwhelmingly concentrated in the public sector, which makes logical sense when you consider the distribution mechanism, right?
Yeah, the government handed it out.
The government actively deployed Maisanta to state-owned enterprises, government ministries, public hospitals, universities, and the military. If you were employed in the public sector and you were on that 3rd list, you were standing directly on the trapdoor. The data reveals that starting in 2005, the employment rate for opposition signers working in the public sector plummeted by an astonishing 10%.
A 10% absolute drop in public sector employment for the opposition. And we aren't talking about like low-level bureaucratic redundancies here. We are talking about senior petroleum engineers at PDVSA, the state oil company. We're talking about tenured university professors, specialized municipal administrators, and senior medical staff.
We are talking about the absolute core of the nation's human capital. These were highly educated elites whose skills were built over decades of state and private investment. So the fundamental economic question becomes, when a state fires thousands of senior engineers and skilled teachers simultaneously, where do they go?
Right, because in a healthy, diversified market economy, you would assume they'd just absorb the shock and migrate to the private sector. A fired state engineer goes to work for a private competitor. But the Venezuelan economy doesn't work like that, does it? The state has a massive monopoly, especially in energy, and the private sector is likely terrified of hiring people the government has officially blacklisted.
That friction is exactly what the data captures. They couldn't simply transition to private corporate roles. They were effectively pushed out of the formal, regulated economy entirely. The NBER paper tracks a massive 7% surge in opposition individuals moving out of formal employment and directly into the informal economy.
When economists say informal economy, We really need to be clear about what that looks like. We aren't talking about freelance consulting.
No, we are talking about survival labor. We are talking about unregulated street vendors, off-the-books day laborers, and people driving unlicensed taxis. The researchers specifically analyzed the types of occupations these purged individuals were forced to accept. The data shows a systemic occupational downgrading.
Downgrading how?
The average educational requirement for their new jobs dropped significantly by over a quarter of a year of schooling on average.
It's an intentional destruction of human potential.
Yeah.
The state didn't need to build gulags. They didn't need to physically imprison the opposition to neutralize them. They simply erased their professional utility. They forced brilliant minds, people who could be designing infrastructure, to sell goods on a street corner just to buy groceries for their families. It is a systematic erasure of human dignity.
And this erasure was accompanied by a profound silencing terror. The statistical regressions proved the financial loss, sure, but the researchers wanted qualitative proof of the psychological environment.
Right, the human element.
They needed to know if the victims understood what was happening to them. So in 2008, they commissioned a highly respected polling firm, Data Analysis, to conduct a special focused survey. They sent pollsters door to door to 1,248 families across the country, specifically targeting individuals who had lost their jobs or experienced severe occupational shifts during that post-recall period.
But when a stranger with a clipboard knocks on your door in a society where the government tracks your data to ruin your life, do you actually tell them the truth? Did the families admit it was because of the software?
The results of the survey are deeply unsettling. Of the people who were laid off during that period, an astonishing 24% explicitly stated to the surveyor that they were fired because of their political opinions.
Wow.
They didn't blame the economy. They didn't blame their performance. They knew exactly why the axe fell.
In a climate of fear, a 24% direct admission of political persecution to a random pollster is an incredibly high number. It implies the reality was so undeniable that they couldn't even pretend otherwise.
It is a high number, but what is perhaps even more telling from a sociological perspective are the people who refuse to speak. A massive portion of the surveyed individuals simply declined to answer the question about why they lost their job. They chose silence.
The silent ones speak volumes. Because when the government has your data, when they have demonstrated that they know your ID number, your address, your political leanings, and your reliance on state food programs trust completely evaporates.
Exactly.
If a pollster asks you a question, your immediate assumption is that the pollster is just another node in the Maisanta network testing your compliance. The paranoia becomes absolute.
That silence represents the death of the social fabric. But while the human cost to those specific middle-class families is devastating, we really have to zoom out here. If we connect this algorithmic purge to the broader macroeconomic picture, we realize that the tragedy of Maisanta isn't just a story about punishing the opposition. It is a story of catastrophic, self-inflicted national harm.
Exactly. You cannot amputate a third of your professional, educated class and expect the national body to keep functioning. What did this political purity test actually cost Venezuela as a whole?
The economists calculated the macro costs using a crucial metric known as total factor productivity, or TFP.
Okay, let's break down TFP for the listener, because it's vital to understanding how economies actually grow or die. It isn't just a measure of how many workers you have, right?
Correct. TFP is effectively a measure of the economy's underlying efficiency and technological capability. If you think of an economy as a machine, capital and labor are the fuel you put into the machine.
Okay.
TFP measures how well the machine is built. It captures how efficiently a country combines its capital and its labor to produce wealth. High TFP means you have a well-organized meritocratic system where the right people are using the right tools. Low TFP means you have grinding gears, waste, and misallocation.
So imagine a nation where the primary criteria for managing a power plant or an oil refinery is no longer an engineering degree, decades of experience, or technical competence. The primary overriding criteria for employment is your political loyalty, as verified by a blue tag in a desktop software program.
When you enforce that criteria, you create what economists call a massive resource mismatch.
Right.
The highly skilled petroleum engineer is pushed into the informal economy to drive a taxi, which is a massive underutilization of their human capital. Meanwhile, an unskilled, inexperienced, but politically loyal individual is promoted to manage the complex state infrastructure. The machine breaks down.
And the paper quantified this.
They did. The NBER researchers built a macroeconomic model to calculate the exact cost of this specific mismatch. By their estimates, the political purge driven by Maisanta caused Venezuela's total factor productivity to collapse by 3.4%.
A 3.4% collapse in the efficiency of the entire nation. Let's translate that abstract percentage into tangible economic pain. What does that actually mean for the country's wealth?
In terms of real output, a 3.4% drop in TFP translates to a staggering loss of roughly 3% of the entire country's gross domestic product.
3% of the GDP just evaporated. It vanished entirely. Not because the price of oil dropped, not because of a global recession, but purely because the state chose to optimize for political purity over professional competence.
And that 3% loss is the trigger for what economists refer to as a systemic death spiral.
The mechanics of that death spiral are terrifying in their inevitability. Let's walk through it.
It operates as a continuous feedback loop. First, you utilize digital tools to purge your talent. Because you purged your talent, your administrative and industrial efficiency drops.
Makes sense.
Because your efficiency drops, basic services begin to fail, and the economy starts to contract. Because the economy is contracting, the general population, including your own supporters, gets angry and restless.
Right, because everyone is suffering now.
Exactly. Because the population is angry, the regime feels its grip on power slipping. And because the regime feels threatened, they respond by utilizing even harsher control, more surveillance, and deeper political purges to maintain authority.
And the cycle repeats, just grinding the country into dust. It's like firing all the brilliant, experienced surgeons in a national hospital network because they don't politically align with the hospital director. You replace them with loyal administrators who have never held a scalpel. And then the administration acts shocked when the patient mortality rate goes through the roof.
Exactly.
Everyone in the hospital pays the price for that incompetence, regardless of their political affiliation. When a database query overrides actual competence, an oil-rich nation begins a chronic, irreversible economic death.
That mechanism, the resource mismatch caused by Maisanta, it plants the seeds for the systemic failures we watched unfold in Venezuela over the subsequent decades. The degradation of the power grid, the collapse of the state oil industry's production capacity, the hyperinflation. You can trace the structural origins of that decay right back to the moment human capital was subordinated to algorithmic loyalty.
As we look at the scope of this deep dive, I keep coming back to a very unsettling thought. We are sitting here analyzing a piece of software from 2004. In the timeline of technology, 2004 is ancient history.
Oh, absolutely.
Facebook was barely a concept in a dorm room. The iPhone didn't even exist. Maisanta was a clunky, basic desktop app, likely distributed on CD-ROMs or early flash drives. But the implications of what it achieved feel incredibly urgent right now.
The paper makes a brilliant historical connection here. It forces us to place Maisanta on an evolutionary timeline of state control. If you look at the 20th century, you see analog systems of oppression. Think about the Stasi in East Germany, with their massive archives of physical taper files, or the personnel dossier systems utilized during the Cultural Revolution in China.
Right, those analog systems were terrifying, but they were bound by the laws of physics. They required massive amounts of physical manpower. You needed tens of thousands of secret police. You needed wiretaps, physical shadowing, informants on every street corner reporting on their neighbors. It was clunky, it was expensive, and importantly, it was highly visible.
Maisanta represents the evolutionary leap from that analog brute force to modern algorithmic control. It is the exact moment the Stasi paper file became a frictionless Excel spreadsheet. It removed the physical constraints of oppression.
And in doing so, it fundamentally shatters the implicit social contract we all operate under in the digital age. This is the ultimate anti-common sense reality check. We willingly surrender our data every single day. We give up our ID numbers, our real-time geographic locations, our financial histories, and our behavioral preferences to massive corporate and state databases.
And we do this because we assume the technology is neutral. We assume that data integration exists to make society more efficient, to give us better credit options, faster commutes, and tailored services.
We assume the efficiency of the bureaucracy is designed for our benefit. But the Maisanta case study proves that the very efficiency of a linked database is the exact mechanism required to scale oppression instantly. The state took two completely benign datasets, a list of signatures from a legal democratic process, and a database of social welfare recipients. They merged them using a primary key, and in an instant, they created a weapon of mass economic destruction.
And they executed that destruction without spilling a single drop of blood. They didn't need to pull citizens out of their beds and line them up against a wall. They didn't need to stage public executions to send a message. They just flipped a digital Boolean tag from false to true, from green to blue. And the economic system, operating on that logic, simply starved them out.
It is a profound historical warning. The mechanism of control has fundamentally changed. The power to destroy a life no longer requires physical force. It only requires administrative access. Let's recap the journey of this deep dive, because the arc of this story is devastating. It begins with millions of citizens exercising a legal constitutional right, a hopeful, massive democratic petition aimed at peaceful change. That hope is immediately met with a psychological warfare campaign, culminating in a literal street billboard promising citizens that your signature is not secret.
Which is just wild to think about.
Right, and that promise manifests in the creation of Maisanta, a simple 2004 software program that cross-references ID numbers, and the undeniable, mathematically proven result: an algorithmic purge that wiped out a professional middle class, forced highly skilled workers into the informal street economy, and cost an entire nation 3% of its GDP, sending it into a death spiral.
The data strips away every illusion. It shows us exactly what happens when data is weaponized by unchecked power.
And that leads us to the final lingering question we have to confront. The NBER researchers documented a prototype of digital control. Maisanta was essentially a beta version of a surveillance state built 20 years ago with rudimentary technology. Now look at the world around you today.
Think about all the data out there.
Look at the incredibly vast interconnected databases you currently reside in. Consider your credit scores, your algorithmic social feeds, your real-time location tracking, and the endless digital footprints you leave everywhere, operating under the assumption that the system is benign. If a clunky 2004 desktop program could execute an invisible nationwide economic purge with that level of terrifying, inescapable precision, what could a modern AI-driven, fully integrated system do with the data you gave away today?
It's the most urgent question of our technological era. Once the data exists, the capability to merge it exists. And once the capability exists, it only requires the political will to turn the key.
Are we building tools of unprecedented convenience, or are we simply laying the infrastructure for a more efficient trap? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden architecture of the Maisanta database. Keep questioning the invisible systems around you and pay attention to where your data lives. We'll see you next time.